On September 15, 2019, at exactly 11:52 a.m., 4 gunshots shattered the Sunday morning peace inside New Covenant Baptist Church on Gresham Avenue in Detroit, Michigan. The congregation had been deep in Holy Communion, voices lifted in worship, when the sound echoed through the building like thunder. People screamed. Children cried. Ushers ran toward the back hallway where the sound had come from. What they found in the church bathroom would shake the foundation of their faith and force an entire community to ask a question nobody wanted to answer. When does a man of God stop being a man and become something else entirely? And when betrayal happens in the house of the Lord, where does justice begin? Welcome to True Crime Altar. If you're drawn to stories where faith collides with deception, where trust is shattered in the most sacred spaces, then you're in the right place. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with anyone who understands that sometimes the darkest secrets hide behind the brightest smiles. While you're here, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with the True Crimes Altar family from all corners of the globe. Detroit's East Side has always been a place of resilience. Blocks of brick houses, corner stores with hand-painted signs, churches on every other street. The kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors, where block parties happened in the summer, and where Sunday morning meant one thing. New Covenant Baptist Church sat on the corner of Gresham and Fairview, a red brick building with stained glass windows that caught the morning sun just right. For over 40 years, it had been the heartbeat of the community. Weddings, funerals, baptisms, every major life event happened within those walls. And for the past 15 years, Curtis Williams had been one of its most faithful members. Curtis Williams was 42 years old, a quiet man with steady hands and a calm presence. He owned a small automotive parts distribution company that supplied local repair shops across Detroit. He wasn't flashy, didn't wear expensive suits or drive luxury cars. He believed in doing honest work, paying his bills on time, and showing up when he said he would. People in the neighborhood respected him because Curtis was the kind of man who kept his word. He'd grown up in Detroit, attended Cass Technical High School, and never left. This was his city, his community, his home. Every Sunday, he sat in the fourth pew from the front, Bible open, taking notes during the sermon. He volunteered on the trustee board, managed the church's building maintenance, and made sure the lights stayed on and the roof didn't leak. To everyone who knew him, Curtis Williams was solid, dependable, a man you could count on. His wife, Diane Williams, was 38 and everything Curtis wasn't. Where he was quiet, she was vibrant. Where he stayed in the background, she commanded attention. Diane led the praise and worship team at New Covenant, and when she sang, the entire sanctuary felt it. Her voice could make you weep or make you shout depending on the song. She wore bright colors, her hair always styled perfectly, her smile warm enough to make strangers feel like family. Women at church admired her. Men respected her because she was Curtis's wife, and Curtis was a good man. She taught Sunday school, organized the women's fellowship, and always had a kind word for anyone going through a hard time. On paper, Curtis and Diane were the model Christian couple. Married 16 years, one daughter, active in the church, no drama. But paper doesn't tell the whole story. Their daughter, Shanice, was 16, a junior at Renaissance High School. She had her mother's smile and her father's quiet strength. Smart, respectful, the kind of kid teachers loved. She sang in the youth choir, made honor roll every semester, and spent weekends helping her dad at his warehouse or rehearsing with her mom at church. Shanice loved her parents deeply, and in return, they gave her stability. A home where dinner was at 6, where homework got done before TV, where church wasn't optional. She didn't know that stability was built on a foundation that had already started to crack. Curtis's older brother, Garrett, was 52 and lived 3 blocks away. He worked as a shift supervisor at the Ford plant in Dearborn and had seen enough of life to know when something wasn't right. Garrett was the one Curtis called when he needed advice, the one who'd sit on the porch with a beer and listen without judgment. He'd been married twice, divorced twice, and he'd tell anyone who asked that he learned more from his failures than his successes. Garrett loved his younger brother, respected the way Curtis had built his life, but he also worried. He'd seen the way Diane smiled a little too brightly sometimes, the way she always seemed to need one more rehearsal, one more meeting. He never said anything directly, but Garrett had instincts. And his instincts told him something was off. Then there was Deacon Raymond Foster. 45 years old, tall, well-dressed, with a voice smooth as honey and a handshake firm enough to make you trust him instantly. Raymond had joined New Covenant Baptist Church 8 years ago, and within 2 years, he'd been ordained as a deacon. He led Bible study on Wednesday nights, visited the sick, prayed with families in crisis, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. Pastor Elijah Monroe, the senior pastor, trusted him completely. The congregation adored him. Raymond was single, never married, and when people asked why, he'd smile and say he was waiting on God's timing. Women in the church tried to set him up with their daughters, their sisters, their friends. He politely declined every time, saying he was too focused on ministry. What nobody knew was that Raymond Foster wasn't focused on ministry. He was focused on opportunity. Pastor Elijah Monroe had led New Covenant for 30 years. At 61, he was a pillar of the community, a man whose sermons could convict your heart and uplift your spirit in the same breath. He'd married Curtis and Diane back in 2003, baptized Shanice when she was a baby, and considered the Williams family one of the church's cornerstone families. Pastor Monroe believed in redemption, in second chances, in the power of prayer to heal anything. He trusted his deacons, his leaders, his flock. That trust would later be described as his greatest weakness. By the summer of 2019, Curtis had started noticing things. Small things at first. Diane coming home later than usual from choir practice. Her phone lighting up with text messages she'd glance at quickly, then put face down. The way she'd laugh a little too loud when Deacon Foster told a joke during fellowship hour. Curtis told himself he was being paranoid. Diane loved the Lord. She loved their family. She wouldn't. But the signs kept piling up. In July, Curtis came home early one afternoon and found Diane on the phone in their bedroom. She ended the call quickly when she saw him, said it was just Sister Patricia from the women's ministry. But her voice had been different. Softer. The kind of tone you use when you're talking to someone who matters. In August, Garrett stopped by Curtis's warehouse to drop off some paperwork. They sat in the small office, drinking coffee, and Garrett finally said what he'd been holding back. "Man, I don't want to start nothing, but you need to pay attention." Curtis looked up. "Pay attention to what?" Garrett hesitated, then leaned forward. "Diane and that deacon. I've seen the way they look at each other. I'm not saying nothing's happening, but I'm saying you need to watch." Curtis's jaw tightened. He didn't want to hear it, but he couldn't unhear it either. That conversation sat heavy in his chest for weeks. By early September, Curtis had started testing things. He'd tell Diane he had a late meeting, then come home early. He'd check her phone when she was in the shower, but it was always locked. He'd ask casual questions about choir practice, and her answers were always smooth, always believable. But something in her eyes had changed. She looked at him differently now, like he was an obligation instead of a partner. On September 10th, 5 days before everything fell apart, Curtis sat in his truck outside the church at 9:30 at night. Diane had said practice would end at 8. Her car was still in the parking lot. So was Deacon Foster's. The lights in the sanctuary were off, but a faint glow came from the fellowship hall. Curtis sat there for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, telling himself to go inside. He didn't. He drove home, and when Diane came in an hour later, he didn't ask where she'd been. The night before September 15th, Curtis didn't sleep. He lay in bed beside Diane, listening to her breathe, staring at the ceiling. Every instinct in his body screamed that something was wrong, but he had no proof. Just a feeling. Just the way she'd been distant for months, the way Deacon Foster always seemed to be around, the way Garrett's words echoed in his mind. "You need to watch." At 6 a.m., Curtis got up, showered, and dressed for church. He put on his gray suit, the one Diane had bought him for their anniversary 3 years ago. He knotted his tie carefully, checked his reflection, and saw a man he barely recognized anymore. Tired eyes. Tight jaw. A man carrying weight he couldn't name. Diane was already in the kitchen when he came downstairs, humming softly as she made coffee. She wore a cream-colored dress with gold buttons, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She looked beautiful, the way she always did on Sunday mornings. "Morning, baby," she said, pouring him a cup. Curtis took it without a word, sipped slowly, watched her move around the kitchen like everything was normal. Shanice came down a few minutes later, earbuds in, scrolling her phone. "Y'all ready?" Diane asked brightly. Curtis nodded. They drove to church in silence, the radio playing gospel softly in the background. Shanice sat in the back, oblivious. Diane hummed along to the music. Curtis gripped the steering wheel and prayed for clarity. New Covenant Baptist Church was already filling up when they arrived at 10:15 a.m. The parking lot buzzed with families greeting each other, children running between cars, ushers handing out programs at the door. Curtis parked in his usual spot near the fellowship hall entrance. As they walked toward the building, Deacon Raymond Foster appeared from around the corner, smiling wide, arms open. "Brother Curtis." "Sister Diane." Good morning." He shook Curtis's hand firmly, then turned to Diane. "Sister Diane, you're glowing today." Diane smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "Thank you, Deacon. You're looking sharp yourself." Curtis watched the exchange. The way Raymond's hand lingered on Diane's shoulder just a second too long. The way her eyes lit up when she looked at him. Curtis felt something cold settle in his chest. The service began at 10:45 a.m. with praise and worship. Diane stood at the front with the choir, microphone in hand, leading the congregation through "Great is Thy Faithfulness." Her voice soared, clear and strong, and people stood, clapping, swaying. Curtis sat in the fourth pew, hands folded, eyes fixed on his wife. He tried to feel the worship, tried to connect with the words, but all he could see was the way Deacon Foster stood in the front row, eyes locked on Diane, nodding along like he was the only one who truly understood her. Pastor Monroe preached on forgiveness that morning, quoting Matthew 6 verse 14. "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." Curtis heard the words, but they felt hollow. How do you forgive what you haven't even confirmed yet? At 11:30 a.m., the service transitioned into Holy Communion. The deacons moved to the front, preparing the bread and wine. Deacon Foster stood among them, his expression solemn, reverent. The congregation lined up row by row, moving toward the altar to receive the elements. Curtis watched as Diane stepped down from the choir stand and joined the line. She took the bread, dipped it in the cup, and bowed her head briefly. When she returned to her seat, Curtis noticed her glance toward the side door near the restrooms. Deacon Foster had slipped out moments earlier. Curtis's pulse quickened. He waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Then Diane stood, whispered something to the woman beside her, and walked toward the same side door. Curtis's hands clenched. He counted to 30 in his head, then stood and followed. The hallway was quiet, the sound of the service muffled behind thick walls. Curtis walked slowly, his footsteps careful, deliberate. He reached the restroom area and stopped. The men's room door was closed. The women's room door was closed. But he heard something. A voice, a laugh. Muffled but unmistakable. He stepped closer to the women's restroom and pressed his ear to the door. He heard movement. Breathing. The soft rustle of fabric. Then Diane's voice, breathless. "We can't keep doing this here." And Raymond's voice, deeper, amused. "Nobody's paying attention, baby. They're all caught up in the spirit." Curtis's hand went to the doorknob. He turned it slowly. The door wasn't locked. He pushed it open. What he saw froze time. Diane and Deacon Raymond Foster pressed against the sink, her dress bunched at her waist, his hands on her hips. Their heads turned simultaneously. Eyes wide. Mouths open. Silence. Curtis stood in the doorway, staring. Not shouting. Not moving. Just staring. Diane's face drained of color. She stepped back, pulling her dress down quickly, hands shaking. "Curtis, she started, but the words died. Raymond straightened, adjusting his tie, his face a mixture of shock and something else. Guilt. Maybe even relief. Curtis didn't say a word. He looked at his wife, The woman he'd loved for 16 years, the woman who sang in the choir, who led Bible study, who kissed him goodnight every evening. Then he looked at Deacon Foster, the man who prayed over families, who visited the sick, who stood at the altar distributing communion. Curtis's jaw tightened. His breathing slowed. He stepped back, let the door close softly, and walked down the hallway. Diane called after him. "Curtis, please." He didn't turn around. Curtis walked through the side door into the parking lot. The September sun was bright, too bright. He moved toward the fellowship hall, keys jingling in his pocket. His office was on the second floor, a small room he used for trustee business. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. He walked to his desk, sat down, and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, was a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver. He'd kept it there for years, registered and legal, in case anyone ever broke into the church. He'd never touched it except to clean it once a year. Now he unwrapped it slowly, checked the cylinder. Fully loaded. He stood, slipped the gun into his waistband, and walked back downstairs. The hallway was still empty when Curtis returned. The service was still going, voices singing, nothing but the blood in the distance. Curtis walked to the women's restroom and opened the door. Diane and Raymond were still there, whispering urgently, panic written across both their faces. When Curtis stepped inside, they both froze. Diane opened her mouth to speak. Curtis raised the gun. The first shot hit Deacon Raymond Foster in the chest. He stumbled back, eyes wide, mouth opening in shock. The second shot hit him in the shoulder as he fell. Diane screamed, hands flying to her mouth. Curtis turned the gun toward her. She backed into the corner, shaking her head, tears streaming. "Curtis, please, I'm sorry, The third shot silenced her. She slumped against the wall. Curtis stood there for a moment, gun still raised, breathing hard. Then he fired one more shot into Raymond's still body. 4 shots total. 11:52 a.m. Curtis walked out of the restroom, gun hanging loosely at his side. The hallway was still empty, but the sound had carried. Shouts echoed from the sanctuary. Footsteps running. He walked slowly toward the front entrance, pushed open the glass door, and stepped outside into the sunlight. He sat down on the steps, placed the gun beside him, and folded his hands in his lap. Within minutes, patrol cars flooded the parking lot, sirens wailing. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Curtis didn't move, didn't resist. When an officer approached cautiously, Curtis looked up calmly and said, "I'm the one you're looking for. They're inside." The officer handcuffed him without incident. As they led him to the squad car, Curtis looked back at the church one last time. The red brick walls. The stained glass. The place where he'd found faith, community, family. And betrayal. Inside the church, chaos erupted. Congregation members flooded the hallways, screaming, crying, trying to understand what had happened. Ushers formed a human barrier to keep people away from the restroom. Pastor Monroe pushed through the crowd, his face pale, hands shaking. When he reached the bathroom and saw the bodies, he stumbled backward, hand over his mouth. Diane Williams lay crumpled against the wall, eyes open, lifeless. Deacon Raymond Foster sprawled near the door, blood pooling beneath him. Paramedics arrived at 12:03 p.m., but there was nothing to do except pronounce them both dead at the scene. The sanctuary emptied quickly, families ushering children to cars, people sobbing in the parking lot. Shanice Williams stood frozen near the entrance, surrounded by church mothers trying to shield her from the truth. When she finally understood what her father had done, her legs gave out. At the Detroit Police Department's 5th Precinct, Curtis sat in an interrogation room, hands cuffed to the table. He hadn't said a word since his arrest. Detective Angela Harris entered at 1:15 p.m., a black woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and 20 years on the force. She sat across from Curtis, studied him for a moment, then spoke softly. "Mr. Williams, I need you to tell me what happened." Curtis looked up, his expression eerily calm. "I caught my wife with Deacon Foster in the church bathroom. They were having sex during communion. I went to my office, got my gun, came back and shot them both. His voice was steady, matter-of-fact, like he was describing a repair job. Detective Harris leaned forward. Did you plan this? Curtis shook his head slowly. No. I suspected something was going on, but I didn't know for sure until today. Over the next 72 hours, detectives began piecing together the full story. They searched Diane's phone, recovered deleted messages between her and Raymond dating back 14 months. The texts were explicit, romantic, filled with promises and plans. But they found something else too. Financial records. Bank statements showing wire transfers from New Covenant Baptist Church's building fund to a personal account under Raymond Foster's name. Thousands of dollars, moved incrementally over 3 years. Fake receipts for construction materials that were never purchased. Invoices for repairs that never happened. Diane's name appeared on several authorization forms. She'd been helping him cover it up. The affair wasn't just about betrayal. It was about money. Raymond had been embezzling from the church, and Diane had been his accomplice. Detective Harris sat with Curtis again on the third day and laid the evidence on the table. Curtis stared at the bank statements, the text messages, the proof of theft. His jaw tightened. I didn't know about the money, he said quietly. Pastor Monroe was devastated. When detectives informed him of the embezzlement, he wept openly in his office. I trusted them, he said, voice breaking. I trusted both of them. The church board held an emergency meeting, froze all accounts, and launched an internal audit. The total amount stolen came to just over $63,000. Money that was supposed to go toward a new roof, upgraded sound equipment, scholarships for youth programs. All of it gone. The congregation felt doubly betrayed. Not just by the affair, but by the theft from God's house. Some members left New Covenant entirely, unable to reconcile what had happened. Others stayed, determined to rebuild. But the church would never be the same. The stain of that Sunday morning seeped into every corner, every pew, every prayer. Curtis's trial began in March 2020, 6 months after the shooting. The courtroom was packed every day. Church members, family, reporters, curious onlookers. Curtis sat quietly beside his public defender, a young black woman named Monica Grant who'd taken the case pro bono. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Kevin Lawson, a methodical lawyer known for winning tough cases. His argument was simple. Curtis Williams had committed premeditated murder. He left the scene, retrieved a weapon, returned, and executed 2 people. That wasn't passion. That was planning. But Monica Grant built her defense around extreme emotional disturbance. She argued that Curtis had been a faithful husband, a devoted father, a pillar of his community. When he discovered his wife's affair in the most humiliating way possible, during a sacred service in the house of God, something inside him broke. The law recognized adequate provocation, she argued. Curtis didn't plan to kill anyone. He snapped. Witnesses testified over 5 days. Garrett Williams took the stand, his voice thick with emotion. He told the court about the conversation he'd had with Curtis in August, how he'd warned his brother to pay attention. Curtis loved that woman, Garrett said. He loved her more than anything. And she destroyed him. Church members testified about Diane and Raymond's relationship, the whispers, the late-night practices, the way they always seemed to find reasons to be alone together. One usher, Sister Phyllis Washington, testified that she'd seen them in the parking lot after a Wednesday service, sitting in Raymond's car for over an hour. I thought they were just talking, she said. But now I know better. The financial records were entered into evidence, showing the full extent of the embezzlement. The prosecution argued that while the affair and theft were terrible, they didn't justify murder. Monica Grant countered that Curtis had been betrayed on every level. Spiritually, emotionally, financially. His entire life had been a lie. On the 4th day of trial, Shanice Williams was called to testify. She walked to the stand slowly, head down, hands shaking. When she sat, she finally looked at her father. Curtis's eyes filled with tears for the first time since the arrest. The prosecutor asked her gently about her parents, about her home life, about what she knew. Shanice spoke softly, said her parents had seemed happy, that she never suspected anything. Then Monica Grant asked her one question. "Do you believe your father is a bad man?" Shanice's voice broke. "No. My dad is a good man. He worked hard. He loved us. He didn't deserve what they did to him." She wiped her eyes, looked directly at the jury. What he did was wrong. But they broke him first. The courtroom was silent. Even the prosecutor didn't cross-examine. When Shanice stepped down, Curtis mouthed the words, "I'm sorry, baby." She nodded, tears streaming. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. On March 18, 2020, they returned with a verdict. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. The charge reflected their belief that Curtis had acted in the heat of passion, under adequate provocation. The judge, a stern woman named Honorable Patricia Reeves, reviewed the case carefully before sentencing. She acknowledged the profound betrayal Curtis had experienced, but she also noted that he had made a choice. He could have walked away. He could have confronted them. He could have divorced his wife and reported the embezzlement. Instead, he took 2 lives. On April 2, 2020, Judge Reeves sentenced Curtis Williams to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12. Curtis stood, accepted the sentence without protest, and was led away in handcuffs. Shanice sobbed in the gallery, held up by Garrett and several church members. Pastor Monroe sat in the back row, head bowed, praying silently. Curtis is currently serving his sentence at the Muskegon Correctional Facility in Michigan. He's been a model inmate, works in the prison library, and attends chapel services every Sunday. Garrett visits once a month, brings pictures of Shanice, who's now in college studying social work. She writes her father letters, though she hasn't visited yet. She says she's not ready. Curtis understands. In a rare interview with a prison chaplain, Curtis was asked if he regretted what he did. He was quiet for a long time before answering. "I regret that my daughter lost both her parents that day. I regret that I let anger control me. But do I regret stopping what they were doing? They dishonored everything I believed in, everything I built. And they did it in God's house." The chaplain asked if he'd found forgiveness. Curtis smiled faintly. "I'm working on it. Every day, I'm working on it." New Covenant Baptist Church still stands on Gresham Avenue. Pastor Monroe retired in 2021, and a younger pastor took over, determined to heal the congregation. They repaid the stolen funds through donations and fundraising. The bathroom where the shooting happened was renovated completely, the walls repainted, new fixtures installed. Some say it was necessary. Others say no amount of paint can cover what happened there. On the anniversary of that Sunday, September 15th, the church holds a special service focused on healing, forgiveness, and accountability. They don't mention names, but everyone knows. The story of Curtis Williams, Diane Williams, and Deacon Raymond Foster has become a cautionary tale whispered in churches across Detroit. A reminder that betrayal doesn't just break hearts. Sometimes it breaks everything. So what's your take? Was Curtis Williams a man pushed too far, or did he cross a line that can never be justified? When trust is shattered in the most sacred space, does the response change the nature of the crime? Can a man be both victim and villain in the same moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think twice about the people you trust, hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Altar. We bring you real stories every week, the kind that don't just shock you, they make you question everything. Tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're in Detroit, across the country, or halfway around the world, we want to know. This is True Crime's Altar, and your voice matters. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember that sometimes the biggest betrayals come from the people closest to us.